Today we celebrate the memorial of St. John of the Cross. He was a Carmelite friar from the 16th century. And he had a really important part, together with St. Teresa of Avila, in the reformation of the Carmelite order, moving that order to live their original constitutions and their original charism. St. John of the Cross is known in the church as the mystic doctor. Of all the spiritual and ascetic authors that the church has, perhaps the most emblematic and the most remarkable author of all is this man, St. John of the Cross, and that's why he is granted this title, Mystic Doctor. One of the most well-known passages of his life was the time that he spent in prison. He was imprisoned by his brother Carmelites, by his brother friars, because they were opposing the reform that he was moving ahead. So he spent almost 9 months imprisoned by his brother friars in a small cell where he's experienced all sorts of sufferings, desolation. And in the middle of this suffering, he composed perhaps his most notable work. This work is called The Dark Night of the Soul. And I think it's worth mentioning or explaining very briefly what his doctrine is. And it's beautiful to see that he came across this doctrine in this prison. So this is what St. John of the Cross teaches. He says, God calls each soul to a profound unity of love. But this unity of love is only possible when the soul is purified enough. This unity cannot be possible while the soul is not enough purified. So he says that the first stage of the purification is the active purification of the soul. And that's our own effort to practice self-denial. The mortification of the senses, the mortification of the will, the mortification of the understanding. And that's our own, let's say, effort to be able to purify ourselves. But he understood, and this is amazing, that in spite of our best efforts, the purification that we could achieve through our own force or through our own strength wasn't enough. God has to purify ourselves. He has to be the one who acts in us to realize, to make possible this purification. And this second moment he calls the passive purification. And this passive purification has two stages. The passive purification of the senses and the passive purification of the spirit. And he discovered this doctrine because he knew that in that prison and in that small cell, God was purifying his soul to make possible that mystical union. He knew that before that prison, he had done all of his efforts to mortify himself and to practice self-denial. But only when he was taken to that prison, he saw that God was purifying him for all that he could not purify himself. And this is the basic doctrine that's expressed in this great book, The Dark Night of the Soul. So what are the two lessons that we could take from St. John of the Cross and his doctrine? The first lesson is the unity of the soul cannot happen if we don't purify ourselves first. God really desires and wills that we would be united with him in love. But that unity cannot happen if we first don't practice self-denial. And the self-denial that we are meant to practice is a very profound and continual self-denial. So today we can ask ourselves, are we purifying ourselves enough actively? Are we practicing enough acts of self-denial throughout the week and especially in this time of Advent? But the second insight, perhaps most importantly, is God wills so much this unity with us that he makes the purification himself once we've done our part. So this passive purification reminds us of how much God desires that we could be united with him in love. So today, brothers and sisters, let us call on the intercession of this remarkable saint And let us tell St. John of the Cross, number one, give us the love of self-denial that you had, that we've expressed in the collect prayer. Give us that love of self-denial of the cross that you had. But secondly, help us understand that you will this unity. But this unity cannot happen until you purify us too.